The divergence between experts who examined the original note and those who worked from copies raises important questions about confirmation bias in forensic science. Confirmation bias occurs when we interpret evidence in ways that confirm our pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Experts who were 100% certain without examining the original note were likely operating under confirmation bias. They had a theory that Patsy wrote the note and interpreted the evidence to support that theory. The proofreader marks Patsy's journalism background, the notepad and fingerprints. All of these facts can be arranged into a compelling narrative if you begin with the assumption of guilt. However, these same facts can be interpreted differently. Proofreader marks might simply indicate someone educated who habitually edits their writing. The notepad, being Patsy's, is only significant if we assume she wrote the note. If an intruder wrote it, the notepad's ownership is irrelevant. Patsy's fingerprints on a notepad from her own home would be expected and prove nothing about the note itself. The nature of the writing itself, written in a printing style using a broad felt-tip pen, masked fine details, making it a non-ideal specimen for definitive analysis, as acknowledged by both the defense and prosecution experts. The writing also showed consistency throughout the long document, indicating that the writer was not trying to disguise the script erratically, despite the unusual context. The handwriting evidence raises philosophical questions about the nature of proof and reasonable doubt. In the legal system, we operate on the principle that it's better for a guilty person to go free than for an innocent person to be convicted. This principle reflects a philosophical stance on justice, truth, and human fallibility. When 6 experts say probably did not write, but some observers remain certain of guilt, we must ask, what standard of proof should we demand? Philosophically, certainty is elusive. We can be certain of logical truths, 2 plus 2 equals 4, and perhaps of our own existence. Descartes' I think, therefore I am, but certainty about events in the external world, especially past events, is always probabilistic. The handwriting evidence, then, becomes a meditation on epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. How do we know what we know? Can we ever truly know who wrote the note without a confession or definitive physical evidence linking a specific person to the document? One of the most perplexing aspects of the entire investigation is the asymmetry of how different family members were ruled in or out of various pieces of evidence. John Ramsey was quickly eliminated from multiple avenues of evidence. The handwriting analysis unanimously excluded him, and according to the document, his DNA was not found in locations where we might expect it to be if he were involved. Yet the same analytical processes that clearly excluded John remained inconclusive or returned for additional scrutiny regarding Patsy and even Burke. The same analysis that said John did not write the note without a shadow of doubt continued to circle back to Patsy with requests for more samples, more comparisons, more examination. Similarly, with DNA analysis, the approach differed based on who was being evaluated. From a forensic perspective, transfer DNA complicates every analysis in this case. Transfer DNA, also called touch DNA, refers to genetic material left behind through casual contact. In a home environment, transfer DNA is everywhere. Family members touch surfaces, objects, clothing, dozens or hundreds of times daily. Their DNA transfers, persists, mixes with other DNA, and creates a complex genetic landscape. The document raises a pointed question. John lived in the house, walked through the basement that morning, carried JonBenet upstairs, albeit away from his body, and spent time near her after she was discovered. Yet his DNA apparently wasn't found on JonBenet in ways that connected him to the events. Patsy and Burke, also living in the house, had their DNA considered with the caveat that transfer was expected, but why wasn't the same transfer expected from John? This asymmetry demands forensic scrutiny. Either the DNA evidence protocol was inconsistent, or there's something about the specific locations and types of DNA found that genuinely differentiates the family member's involvement. The document suggests confusion about this disparity, and that confusion is forensically valid. Psychologically, this asymmetry might reflect investigative tunnel vision, a cognitive bias where investigators focus on a particular suspect or theory and interpret all subsequent evidence through that lens. If early in the investigation, certain factors, the notepad, the linguistics, the behavior, pointed toward Patsy, investigators might have unconsciously filtered subsequent evidence through a Patsy as perpetrator framework. Tunnel vision is a well-documented problem in criminal investigations. Once investigators develop a theory, they tend to seek evidence that confirms it and discount evidence that contradicts it. This isn't malicious, it's a feature of how human cognition works. We are pattern-seeking creatures, and once we've identified a pattern, we resist revising it. John's clear elimination might have intensified focus on Patsy, not because the evidence against her was stronger, but because she was the remaining parent. If investigators believed the evidence pointed to someone in the home and John was excluded, Patsy became the default alternative. This reasoning is logical in one sense, but problematic in another. It assumes the framework someone in the home is correct. There's also an anthropological dimension to why suspicion remained focused on Patsy. Across cultures and throughout history, mothers occupy a particular moral space. They are simultaneously idealized as nurturers and protectors and viewed with profound suspicion when anything happens to their children. The archetype of the mother who harms her child violates deep cultural taboos, yet it also holds a kind of horrified fascination for investigators and the public alike. This cultural framework might have influenced how evidence about Patsy was interpreted. The maternalistic language in the notepad from her home, her presence when the note was discovered, all of these details could be viewed as neutral facts or as pieces of a damning narrative, depending on the cultural lens applied. Moreover, Patsy's status as a former beauty queen added another layer of cultural narrative. Beauty pageants carry their own set of cultural associations, performance, artifice, ambition, the pressure to present a perfect image. Some investigators and observers might have unconsciously mapped these associations onto the evidence, seeing the ransom note as another kind of performance, the staging as another form of image management. To understand this case, we must attempt to enter the mind of whoever wrote the note and was present that night. This requires us to think about criminal psychology, risk assessment, and rationality. If an intruder wrote the note before the family returned home, they were calculating risk in a particular way. They would need to believe they had sufficient time to write multiple pages, potentially make mistakes and start over the practice note, and complete whatever they came to do, all while risking discovery if the family came home early, if Burke woke up, if anyone heard something. This kind of calculation suggests confidence bordering on recklessness. Criminal psychologists would classify this as high-risk behavior, indicating either an experienced offender who has successfully committed similar acts or someone in an altered psychological state, mania, psychosis, extreme anger, that distorts their risk assessment. Alternatively, if someone in the home wrote the note after the events of that night, they were calculating an entirely different set of risks. They would be weighing immediate discovery against the possibility of creating an alternative narrative that might protect them. This calculation reflects desperation, but also a kind of clarity. The note needed to be long enough and detailed enough to be credible, to buy time for evidence to degrade, for memories to become uncertain, for the initial chaos to provide cover. The ransom note is a testament to the perpetrator's attempt to control the narrative, yet its unusual construction left a confusing trail of information. What remains missing is the conclusive, uncontested DNA evidence from the note itself to match the writer definitively. In a 2015 AMA, Mark Beckner stated the only fingerprint found on the note belonged to the document examiner at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. While the note has been extensively analyzed for linguistics and handwriting, the lack of definitive DNA evidence from the paper itself connecting it to a known or unknown suspect allows the contradictory psychological interpretations, staging by a parent versus taunting by a clever, disturbed intruder, to persist. John Ramsey noted in a 2001 deposition that if an adequate amount of handwriting samples from the person responsible could be found, it would conclusively tie him to the long and rambling note. Until an undeniable physical link is established to the author, the note remains a highly descriptive yet ultimately interpretive piece of evidence, keeping the question of identity and the intended meaning behind this bizarre performance locked away. Philosophically, this case confronts us with questions about meaning and chaos. We humans are meaning-making creatures. When we encounter something as bizarre and terrible as this case, we want it to make sense. We want the evidence to point clearly in one direction. We want the psychology to be coherent. We want ultimately for evil to be explicable, but perhaps some events resist explanation. Perhaps the note, with all its contradictions, personal yet informed by movies, lengthy yet functionally unnecessary, angry at John yet initially addressing Patsy, contemptuous yet oddly caring in phrasing, reflects a mind that was itself contradictory, operating on logics we cannot fully reconstruct. The existentialist philosophers argued that life is fundamentally absurd, that we impose meaning on a universe that has none. This case, in some ways, embodies that absurdity. All the evidence, all the expert analysis, all the thousands of hours of investigation, and still the fundamental questions remain unanswered. As we conclude this analysis, we return to the questions that cannot be satisfactorily answered without additional evidence. Why did the perpetrator begin addressing both parents but shift to focus solely on John? This question haunts the analysis because it suggests either confusion or a dual purpose we haven't grasped. If the person had ammunition only for John, if all their contempt, their knowledge of his bonus, their anger was directed at him, then why include Patsy at all in the initial draft? The human mind doesn't typically operate with this kind of incoherence unless something shifted during the writing process itself. How did the perpetrator know with such certainty that JonBenet would be accessible? If the note was written before the family returned home, how could the person responsible know she wouldn't be sleeping elsewhere? This question points to either extraordinary surveillance or inside knowledge. Why is Burke entirely absent from the narrative? He is never mentioned in the note, never apparently considered as a complication, never acknowledged. For an intruder, this represents either incredible luck or a level of knowledge about the family's sleeping arrangements that borders on impossible. For someone in the home, it represents the kind of knowledge that comes from living there. Why does the evidence exclude John so definitively while remaining ambiguous about Patsy? This asymmetry is forensically significant and psychologically troubling. It suggests either that John truly had no involvement, and the evidence consistently reflects this, or that the investigation focused its scrutiny unevenly. These questions persist because the note itself persists, a three-page document that is simultaneously revealing and obscuring, that tells us both too much and too little, that performs the role of ransom note while possibly serving an entirely different psychological function, until science can definitively connect the note to a specific author through DNA, fingerprints, or other physical evidence that cannot be disputed. It remains what it has always been, a window into someone's minds, but a window so strange and distorted that we cannot quite make out what lies on the other side.